Hi everyone, Dr. Hatami is here. In this video, we're going to talk about the central nervous system. We know central nervous system is composed of brain and spinal cord, and in this short video, we're going to talk about some important part of the brain. Let's first talk about what the brain does. Brain controls vital functions. These are things we don't have to think about it, like your heart rate, your respiratory rate, your blood pressure. Um, For example, even while you sleep, your brain keeps your heart beating and your lungs working. Next, the brain helps maintain the internal environment. It does this through two main systems, the autonomic nervous system and endocrine system. The autonomic nervous system controls things like your digestion, sweating, and the endocrine system uses hormones to regulate body functions, like when your brain tells your body to release adrenaline if you're scared. The brain also controls movement of the head and neck, and it helps manage the organs found in thoracic cavity, in abdominal cavity, like your lungs, your stomach, and your intestines. And also, the brain gives us intelligence and consciousness, the ability to think, reason, and be aware of ourselves. It's also responsible for memory, and we combine sensory information with motor actions. For example, when you touch something hot, then quickly you're going to move your hand, right? That is your brain processes the pain and send a signal to your muscle to react. Finally, the brain plays a key role in emotions, behavior, and socialization. It helps us feel happy, sad, or angry, and it also affects how we act around other people. So, in short, your brain keeps you alive, helps you think and feel, and connects you to the world around you. Brain is composed of four regions, four parts: cerebrum, diencephalon, cerebellum, and brainstem. So in this video, we're going to talk about these three parts of the brain: diencephalon, cerebellum, and brainstem. And in separate video, you can watch the cerebrum, which is actually the most part of the brain. Let's start. The first thing that we have to know about the brain, that we can see some areas of the brain darker and some areas of the brain which is lighter. So we have a gray matter, which is the darker area, and white matter, which is the lighter area. Why this part is darker and why this part is lighter? Because the gray matter contains the axons, which they do not have myelin, and also the cell body of neurons. That's the reason we can see this area darker. So then we can call it as gray matter. So one more time, gray matter is composed of unmyelinated axons and the neuron cell bodies. And also this gray matter, it can form some cluster of cell bodies which can be found in the white matter region, and we call them as nuclei. So the gray matter would be found on the surface of the brain, which is called cortex. So cortex would be the region of the brain which is made up of gray matter. Where can we see the cortex? We can see the cortex which cover the cerebrum. Then it's called the cerebral cortex. And also the gray matter covering the cerebellum is called cerebellar cortex. So cerebral cortex and cerebellar cortex are the gray matter of the brain, which is composed of unmyelinated axons and the neuron cell bodies. But what about the white matter region? White matter is composed of myelinated axons and also some non-myelinated axons, because the myelin sheath is made up of lipids, so it looks white. So that's the reason the white matter is lighter, or actually it's white. So these axons are grouped into tracts, like highways that carry information across different parts of the brain. So Gray matter processes information and white matter connects everything together. Look at this section of the brain. So as you can see, some part of the brain looks darker and some area looks whiter. So here we have the gray matter and this region is white matter. So the gray matter, which is going to cover the brain, is called the cortex. So that would be the cerebral cortex. And then inside of the white matter also we can see some like dark area, which is actually would be the collection of the cell body of neuron, which is called brain nuclei. Okay, let's continue with the part of the brain. So if you remember, we divided the brain into the cerebrum, the most abundant part of the brain, and then brainstem, diencephalon, and cerebellum. Right now, we're going to talk about the brainstem, this green area that you can see here. Brainstem is composed of these three parts: midbrain, pons, and medulla oblongata. So then from top to bottom, so the top part would be midbrain. And then the middle part that you can see like a bulge, that would be pons. And then the bottom part of the brainstem, which is going to connect the brain to the spinal cord, is the medulla oblongata. So these three parts are the brainstem. So as I mentioned before, these parts is going to connect our brain to the spinal cord. Okay, let's start with the midbrain. The small part of the brain that sits between the diencephalon and the pons. In midbrain, we can see some important part: substantia nigra, superior colliculi, and inferior colliculi. These are the important part of the midbrain. And also there are two cranial nerves attached to the midbrain. Let's talk about these important structures related to the midbrain. Substantia nigra is the area which controls the voluntary movement. It means the movement you choose to make, like walking or picking something up. But when cells in substantia nigra start to break down, it can lead to the Parkinson's disease. People with Parkinson's disease may shake or have trouble moving smoothly, which means that they have problem with some voluntary movement. Then let's talk about the two cranial nerves attached to the midbrain. So we have cranial nerve number 3, cranial nerve number 4, oculomotor nerve, and trochlear nerve. Both of these control the eye movement, like when you're looking up, down, or side to side. These nerves are involved and they would be attached to the midbrain. Midbrain is also would be involved in some reflexes like visual reflexes and auditory reflexes. So we can say that it has reflex centers. So the superior colliculi and inferior colliculi are the part of the midbrain would be involved in visual and auditory reflexes. So the superior colliculi help with the visual reflexes. For example, when you quickly turn your head, if you see something move, that is because of the midbrain, the superior colliculi. And inferior colliculi help with the auditory reflexes. Like when you hear a loud noise and instantly look toward the sound, that is because of your inferior colliculi of your midbrain. So overall, the midbrain helps us move, see and hear, and react quickly to the world around us. Now let's talk about this second part of the brainstem, which is pons. Pons sits between the midbrain and medulla oblongata. act like a bridge that connects the brainstem to the cerebellum. And the pons helps with balance and coordination. There are three cranial nerves attached to the pons. We have trigeminal nerve number 5, the cranial nerve number trigeminal nerve or cranial nerve number 5, cranial nerve number 6 or abducens nerve, and cranial nerve number 7 or facial nerve. These cranial nerves are attached to the pons. We're also going to learn about these nerves in peripheral nervous system, but just in short, trigeminal nerve helps with feeling sensation in your face and controls the muscle of chewing. For example, when you chew your food, this nerve is working. An abducens nerve is the motor nerve for muscle movement that moves your eyes side to side. And facial nerve or cranial nerve number 7 controls your facial expressions, like when you're smiling or frowning. So the pons help with movement, feeling in your face, connecting important part of your brain. Now let's talk about the last part of the brainstem. Medulla oblongata is the lowest part of the brainstem. It connects the brain directly to the spinal cord. The medulla control very important things that keep you alive, like your heartbeat, your blood pressure, your breathing. Again, when you're sleeping, medulla makes sure your heart keeps beating, keep breathing without thinking about it. And there are several important cranial nerves connected to the medulla oblongata. We have the cranial nerve number 8 or vestibulocochlear nerve. We have cranial nerve number 9 or glossopharyngeal nerve, cranial nerve number 10 or vagus nerve, and cranial nerve number 12 or hypoglossal nerve. These nerves are attached to the medulla oblongata, which vestibulocochlear nerve help with hearing and balance. Glossopharyngeal nerve help control the tongue and throat, which is important for swallowing and tasting. The vagus nerve control many internal organs like your heart, stomach, and then the hypoglossal nerve is going to control movement of the tongue. Okay, now let's talk about the cerebellum, the second largest part of the brain. So the cerebellum is the part of the brain helps you move well, stay balanced, and even think more clearly in some ways. Let's see where the cerebellum would be found. Cerebellum, it sits behind the medulla and pons. So actually, there is fourth ventricle between the cerebellum and pons. So cerebellum is going to help when we are walking or riding a bike to make sure the movement are smooth and controlled. So it means that it's going to coordinate movements and your body moves smoothly, and also it's going to keep your posture straight and helps you stay balanced. So smoothing and coordinating the body movements and maintain the posture and then the balance or equilibrium. It also helps with motor memory, like remembering how to play the piano or type without looking at the keyboard. And it's even involved in some thinking tasks like language and problem solving. Cerebellum has two has two halves, which connected in the middle by a part called the vermis. And the surface of the cerebellum, it has ridges and also grooves. Ridges are called folia, and then grooves are called fissures. So if you look at the cerebellum surface, it has a wrinkled appearance because of these ridges and grooves, folia and fissures. So now let's look at the cerebellum. So as you can see, at the surface, we can find the folia and also ridges. So it has the wrinkled appearance. And then look at here, in front of the cerebellum, there is pons and also medulla oblongata is here. And look at the fourth ventricle, which fourth ventricle would be found between the cerebellum and the pons. So if you cut the cerebellum and look at the inside of it, you can see some parts are darker. So the darker part would be found at the surface of the cerebellum, which is called cortex. So the cerebellar cortex is the gray matter. Okay, and then also you can see some white part or the white matter of the cerebellum. The white matter of the cerebellum, it looks a tree, which this tree is called arbor vitae. So that's the reason the white matter of the cerebellum is called the arbor vitae. So here you can see this like tree-shaped white matter of the cerebellum. So then arbor vitae, it would be the white matter of the cerebellum. And then inside of the white matter, we might have some cluster of the neuron cell body, which is called the nuclei. So then inside of the cerebellum, we have cortex at the surface, and we have white matter inside, which would be the arbor vitae. Now let's talk about the diencephalon, the last part of the brain which we're going to discuss in this video. Diencephalon is the central core of the brain. So if you cut the brain, so at the center you can find the diencephalon. So diencephalon would be surrounded by our cerebral hemisphere, and it has these three components: thalamus, hypothalamus, and epithalamus are the part of the diencephalon. Let's talk about the thalamus. Thalamus is a pair of egg-shaped structures, which actually it makes up around 80% of the diencephalon. It sits on the upper side of the third ventricle in the brain. It has many nuclei. And then what is the function of the thalamus? The thalamus, it works as a relay station. What does it mean? Thalamus, it works as a relay station. This means it receives signals from almost all of your senses, like touch, vision, hearing, except the smell. And then it's going to send all of this information to the right area of the cerebral cortex. So then it means that the thalamus is receiving all of these sensory information from our all senses except the smell, and then send them to the right area of the cerebral cortex. So that would be between our senses and then the cerebral cortex. So that's the reason we call this as a relay station. So just imagine when we have the thalamus here, so all of the sensory information from our eye, from our skin, from our joint, getting to the thalamus, and then thalamus is going to send them to the cerebral cortex. So we call this as relay station. But the thalamus doesn't just pass messages along, it also organizes and filters the signals to help you focus. Okay, so for example, if you're in a noisy room but trying to listen to one person talk, your thalamus helps your brain pay attention to that one voice and ignore the background noise. So the thalamus is like a smart traffic controller for sensory information, sorting and sending messages to the right place at the right time. Next, let's talk about the hypothalamus, which is the lower part of the diencephalon. Hypothalamus controls many important body functions without us even noticing. It helps run the autonomic nervous system, which means it controls things like your heart rate, blood pressure, digestion, and gland activity. It also would be involved in body temperature regulation. your body's thermostat is your hypothalamus. It controls body temperature. So if you're too hot, it tells your body to sweat. If you're cold, it makes you shiver. It also helps trigger a fever when you're sick. It also would be the hunger and thirst regulation center. It regulates hunger, it regulates thirst by checking the level of nutrients and salt in your blood. So when you're low on either, you feel hungry or thirsty. The hypothalamus also controls your sleep wake cycle, using light and dark signal to set your internal clock. It also manages the endocrine system by sending signals to the pituitary gland, which control many hormones in the body. It plays a big role in emotions and motivation. So that is the emotional response and motivation center, like pleasure, fear, or the drive to eat and survive, because it's part of the limbic system. And also it's going to be involved in a memory formation. So it would be connected to the memory through the mammillary bodies, which link to the hippocampus. So the hippocampus is a small but the hypothalamus is very small part of the brain, but it's powerful. So if you check, it can do everything from controlling our autonomic nervous system, from regulating our body temperature, regulating hunger and thirst, even regulating our sleep-wake cycle or endocrine system, our emotions, and also memory formation. So it keeps your body balanced and helps you respond to your needs and feelings. So then let's talk about the hypothalamus. So the hypothalamus is the top and most dorsal part of the diencephalon. So if you look at this picture, you can see the epithalamus would be found just here at the top part and dorsal part of the diencephalon. So the main structure in the epithalamus is the pineal gland. The pineal gland serving our endocrine system by producing hormone melatonin. So the pineal gland is a very small gland, but the hormone helps control your sleep-wake cycle. It works under the control of the hypothalamus. When it gets dark, melatonin levels go up and signals your body that it's time to get ready for sleep. So the epithalamus helps your brain know when it's time to rest. Okay, so then as we discussed in this video, we talked about the brainstem composed of the midbrain, pons, and medulla oblongata. We talked about the midbrain, which has, let me erase this part so then we can see this superior and then inferior culiculi, and we said how these structures can be involved in visual and auditory reflexes. And then we talked about the pons and the cranial nerves attached to the pons. We talked about the medulla oblongata, which it would be involved in controlling our vital function as well. Then we talked about the cerebellum, and look at these arbor vitae, the white matter of the cerebellum. And also we said how the cerebellum has the wrinkled appearance because of those folia and fissures found at the surface of the cerebellum. And we also talked about the diencephalon composed of the thalamus, epithalamus, and then the hypothalamus and epithalamus. So thalamus is here, hypothalamus is here, and epithalamus is here. We know the thalamus would be the relay station, is receiving all of the sensory information and then send them to the right area of the cortex. And then we talked about the hypothalamus, which can control many important things. And then at the end, we talked about the epithalamus and the pineal gland. Okay, thank you so much for watching this short video, and in the next video you can watch the cerebrum, which is the most part of the brain. Thank you.